Good morning, distinguished guests. Welcome to the seminar, Myanmar's New Era, Problems and Prospects. I think, first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Pongthong Pawakapan. I teach at the Department of International Relations, Faculty of Political Science. So I'm a colleague of Dr. Thitinan here. So I will be a moderator for today. So the topic, Myanmar's New Era, Problems and Prospects. I think it's just the right time to discuss this issue since there are a number of several good news coming out from the countries. But of course, there's still some challenges and problems that we need to discuss today. Before I ask our dean, Professor Ek, to give your opening remark, let me introduce our speakers. I will follow the orders of the speaker today. The first speaker will be Dr. Richard Horsey. Dr. Richard is a Yangon-based author and political analyst and Myanmar advisor for the International Crisis Group. We are lucky today to have a number of experts on Myanmar today. So Dr. Horsey spent several years in Myanmar working for a number of international organizations, and he's very fluent in Myanmar and wrote a number extensively on Myanmar too. His writing focused on isolated authoritarian regimes, the politics of conflict and state fragilities. The second speaker, Harn Yawngwhe. Right, Yawngwhe, right? Sorry if I pronounce your name not correctly. Han is an executive director of Burma office, Myanmar. He spent 48 years in exile and now returning to Myanmar to facilitate ceasefire negotiation between the government and 16 ethnic groups organizations. His organization, Burma office, also supports 29 liaison offices nationwide, coordinate a network of INGOs involving in the building and negotiating capacity of conflict partners. And also liaisons between ethnic political party and civil society groups to help the peace process. So I think he's just the right person to talk about the negotiation relationship between the new Myanmar's government and the ethnic groups. And he's actually a prince, right? So since he is the son of South Shwe tribe, the last hereditary ruler of Yawngwhe, who in 1948 became the first president of the Independent Republic of the Union of Burma. His mother, Sao Hun Kam, right, founded the Chan State Army in 1964 to receive Burma military forces. And our third speaker today, I don't think you need much introduction. Our director of the Institute of Security and International Studies, Professor Thitinan Pongsudhirak. Everyone knows, I'm sure everyone here knows Professor Thitinan very well. And the last speaker of today is Gwen Robinson. I'm sure you know her very well too. Gwen is the editor of the Nikkei Asian Review, who is also kindly sponsored the forum today. And Gwen is also senior fellow at the ISIS as well. She specializes in Myanmar and the surrounding region, have extensive experience covering Thailand, Myanmar, and several countries from in the region for the US, Australian, and UK media.
Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to all of you and welcome to today's ISIS forum on the problem and prospect of Myanmar's new era. As we in this room know, there has been momentous political reforms and changes in Myanmar over the past several years. It is remarkable that Myanmar is now a democratic country with an electoral system. It is also remarkable that we in Thailand have what people in Myanmar used to face, and the Myanmar people today have what we in Thailand used to have. It is a sad low reversal for us in Thailand, but I think the Myanmar people feel that it is their good fortune to be where they are. As we saw, Myanmar had elections in November last year, and the country now has a new civilian-led government under Aung San Suu Kyi National League for Democracy Party, with Tin Chaw as titular president, while the Myanmar's military and Tatmadaw has made some concession. It retains key security-related cabinet portfolio and a 25% constitutional quota of parliamentary. Myanmar has come a spectacularly long way, but it is not out of the woods. The country will face many challenges, and we will examine some of them at this forum today. Our objective today is to tease out some of the insights, dynamics, and contours for what is to come after Myanmar's new dawn. I think what we want is this region is for Myanmar and Thailand and other countries to rise up together. We don't want to see Thailand going up and Myanmar down, or the other way around. We need to learn from each other. Myanmar can see in Thailand that things should not be taken for granted, and Thailand should be in Myanmar that only concessions and compromise can move the country forward. I hope this forum will make a small contribution in the direction of learning from each other. I want to thank all of the speakers, the moderator, and participants. In particular, I want to thank Mr. Harn Yawngwhe and Richard Horsey for traveling to be with us today. Many thanks to Ms. Gwen Robinson, who is our senior fellow at ISIS and who also put this panel together based on her extensive work and travel in Myanmar. And thanks to Ajahn Thitinan and Ajahn Phuongthong for their contributions. So now let me turn the floor to Ajahn Phuongthong.
It's time to kick off the talk today. So Dr. Richard Horsey will give an overview and highlight and interpret some key developments that we see coming out from Myanmar.
Thanks very much, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me to speak today. It's great to be back at Chulalongkorn University again. It's a very useful moment now, I think, to take stock of where developments are in Myanmar. So we're now about halfway through the mythical first 100-day period. In fact, I think today is day 48 of the National League for Democracy's government. So where are we? I mean, obviously expectations in the country are running sky high. The NLD won a landslide victory in the elections on the back of an electoral slogan of change. And people want change, they need change, and I think they are very much expecting change. So one of the biggest challenges, of course, are these very high expectations. But I think we shouldn't make too much of this. The high expectations are also balanced by an enormous amount of confidence and trust in the new government, and I think a general recognition among the population of the country that it will not be easy and it will not be quick to turn around their lives. So, together with those high expectations is, I think, a lot of patience still there for delivery. But I think the landslide election result can obscure some of the realities in the country. it's very clear that in the center of Myanmar, among the Burma Buddhist majority, there's an enormous amount of support for Aung San Suu Kyi. More than support, love, trust, confidence. But this picture doesn't necessarily replicate across all sectors of society or all regions of the country. And it's true that in ethnic minority areas, the majority of the population in most of those areas did vote for the NLD. But the election results were at least as much a referendum on the previous years of military rule as they were a vote of confidence in the NLD to solve the various challenges in the country. So if you look away from the center to the periphery, you see a much more mixed picture in terms of how confident people are and how much trust they have in the new administration to address their issues. And I think it's very important to remember that the biggest challenges that are facing Myanmar as a nation are not policy challenges. They are structural challenges. And that means there's no easy new set of policies that will address them and resolve them. And what that means is that the NLD's ability to bring new policies will not necessarily mean that it's in a better position to solve some of these deep challenges. In fact, I think it will be more difficult for this government to solve some of those big challenges facing Myanmar than it was for the Thein Sein government. And there's a number of reasons why that's the case. The one that is most often cited is lack of experience. And I'd like to say a bit more about that in a moment, because I think while this is true, it's often misunderstood why this is a problem. So it's the lack of experience of the new administration. It's the fact that the new government does not have such close relations with the Myanmar military as the previous government did. And it's the fact that there's a lot of suspicion in some quarters about the intentions of the NLD and where it will take society and the country. And that means that on issues like Rakhine State, on issues like Burman Buddhist nationalism, on issues like the peace process, there's actually an awful lot of scrutiny going to be brought to bear on any policy initiatives from the NLD, possibly greater scrutiny than the previous government faced. So for all these reasons, I think the NLD faces a huge challenge in addressing these deep structural problems. And I think the nature of those problems is fairly well known. It's the intercommunal relationship between the different religions, particularly in Rakhine State as it expresses itself between the Rakhine Buddhists and the Muslim communities, including the Rohingya. It's the peace process, this incredibly complicated peace process involving more than 20 different armed groups and numerous other political actors. And it's the need to reboot the economy and get not only growth but equitable growth, given the huge levels of poverty in the country, and to do that at a time when the international economic headwinds are quite strong. So let's look a bit at the story so far. The cabinet that's been appointed by Aung San Suu Kyi and the new president has been criticized a little bit, I think, for being somewhat inexperienced in general. And it is clear that it's a cabinet of loyalty, not a cabinet of all the talents. So these are people who've been picked primarily for their loyalty to the NLD and to Aung San Suu Kyi, rather than an attempt to bring in all of the technocratic experience that would be available. There's a lack of... So I think there's been a lot of focus on this, actually, when we come to the question of NLD experience. There's been a lot of focus on, do these ministers know how to run a ministry? Do they know the portfolios that they've been assigned to? there was these scandals of two ministers with key economic portfolios having fake PhDs. But I think in a sense this kind of misses the point. All new administrations have ministers who aren't necessarily experienced in running ministries. It will certainly not be the first time in Myanmar's recent history that ministers don't know anything about the substance of the portfolio they've been given, and it's hardly unusual internationally. And it will take time for this cabinet to find its feet. So I'm sure there will be some high performers, and I'm sure there will be some less good performers, and that will come out in the next months, and I'm sure there will be, reshuffles to address that. But I think the biggest concern should not be the inexperience of the cabinet. They'll find their feet. Rather, it's the lack of management experience and management systems at the top of the NLD hierarchy. And that, I think, is more difficult, because the challenge will be to reverse a culture, a political and governance culture, which is extraordinarily top-down, and where for decades decision-making power has been concentrated right at the very top. In the last 5 years, we've seen some moves towards breaking that up, tentative, but nevertheless significant. And I think one of the early worrying signs is that there is a tendency to reconcentrate power right at the top. And if you combine that with the lack of experience of a new cabinet coming in, you have the potential for a policy-making logjam. And I think there are a few signs of that. So I think that's definitely something to watch. But beyond that, not everyone is happy these few weeks in. We see signs of discontent in several different quarters. Now, it's very early days, and there's time to address these, redress it, and bring people together. But nevertheless, I think it's important to take note of some of these points of concern. So, many ethnic leaders are bristling that when it comes to the peace process, some early decisions and announcements have been made with very little consultation with them. There have been appointments to executive positions of senior ethnic leaders, a small number. That's a good, but that's a good sign nonetheless. But those appointments were taken without any consultation with the parties, the ethnic political parties from whom those senior ethnic officials were appointed. The Burman nationalists are agitating. We've seen the resumption of nationalist demonstrations in the last couple of weeks, when things had gone very, very quiet since the elections. And I think the nationalists are testing right now the new government. They're testing its nationalist credentials. They're drawing some red lines, particularly so far on the use of the term Rohingya, which the nationalists deeply object to. But I think more generally they're testing its credentials in terms of Buddhist nationalism. The military is not very happy. The reason for this is not that it has, given up significant control and sees its old nemesis basically as the de facto leader of the country. Although I'm sure there are military officers who are not wildly enthusiastic about these developments. But we shouldn't forget that this transition process was initiated and planned by the military itself, and it has very significant strategic investment in this process. And the reason it started it in the first place was to achieve certain strategic goals for the country as much as for the military. So they're unhappy, I would say, more with the tone of governance to this point than with the substance. A certain number of steps have been taken which they are really not very happy about. The appointment of Aung San Suu Kyi as state councilor was something that they argued against on the grounds that it was a clear violation of the constitution. They have a point. It does really seem to violate the separation of powers enshrined in the constitution, because the law which establishes the state councillor provides that she is accountable not only to the executive but also to the legislature. But I think they could have accepted this if it were done in a different way. So when they raised their concerns about constitutionality in the Parliament, when the bill was being debated, the Speaker did not really accommodate or give much face to their concerns. These were pretty prima facie valid concerns. And basically the bill was rammed through using the NLD's large legislative majority, and it was passed without any changes, without one word being amended. And so the military complained about this publicly, calling it democratic dictatorship, I think was the term. Now, irony of that aside, it's a little bit concerning that early on the military is getting so frustrated at its inability to have any influence on bills and wording of bills that it sees as touching the constitutional framework of the country. So I think, if this had been done in a slightly different way, if the concerns had been taken on board, a few words were changed here and there without touching the substance of the bill, a much more collaborative mood could have been facilitated in the Parliament, and that really didn't happen. And it's one example of several where the NLD have pointed out that, we have the majority, we can pass any laws that we like. They also, of course, control the Constitutional Tribunal. So although the military could have challenged this bill in the Constitutional Tribunal, and it's open to them still to do so, it's pretty clear what the result would be. And so I think the precedent has been set that the NLD can pass legislation, whether or not it fits closely with the Constitution, using its majority. And that is making the military unhappy. They're unhappy on a number of other levels as well, and a number of other things that have happened. More broadly, I think there's been a lack of consultation in decision-making on key points so far. So not only was the military not informed or consulted in advance on the details of the State Councilor bill, there was no consultation with armed group or other ethnic leaders before the key announcement was made by Aung San Suu Kyi on her vision for the peace process. And don't forget, we're halfway through the peace process now. I don't say we're partway through. Let's not say halfway through. We're partway through the peace process now. A lot of negotiation has happened over the last 5 years. And so I think, to announce a new thrust with some new language and potentially a slightly new direction for the peace process without detailed consultation has worried very much the other stakeholders in the peace process regarding, how much their views will be taken on board and how much this will be a kind of unilateral process. And then I guess, lastly, in terms of groups that are a bit prickly these days, I would say the media and civil society. There's been some quite surprisingly robust criticism of the new government from domestic Myanmar media. And I think the government had underestimated quite how independent the media was and quite how ready it was to cast a bright light on everything that was being done. And the media, I think, feels that the NLD has not gone out of its way to engage them, brief them, provide information, provide transparency. And so there's an emerging feeling within many in the media corps that actually there's less transparency right now than there was over the last 5 years. It's harder to get quotes from ministers. It's harder to get information about decision-making. Now, this may be a temporary situation. The NLD has been saying that this is a very sensitive time. It's a time when it would be unwise to say things which might create tensions. Ministers are under, instructions not to speak too much about the media. MPs are under a gag order. The MPs are not allowed to speak to the media unless their comments have been cleared or they have permission. But But nevertheless, I think there's this sense among the media that they need more information and it's not coming. And civil society, I think, is very mixed. It's a very mixed picture. It's a very mixed group of organizations. But they also feel that while there's certainly going to be more legal space for civil society, all the signals coming from the new government are that they are reforming laws to make them more democratic, increasing democratic space, increasing the scope for public demonstrations, and so forth. That the ability of civil society to access and influence senior decision makers in government may be at least as difficult now as it was in the past. So I think that's something to watch. So just to conclude then, where's all this going? It's too early to say. I think these initial data points are of interest for reflection. They're worth keeping an eye on, but it's way too early to say what the trajectory is going to be over the next year, much less over the next 5 years. So I think what one can do is identify a certain number of issues that it's worth keeping an eye on as kind of, signals of how this is all going. As I said, I think the cabinet will find its feet, but I think it's very much worth keeping an eye on how well will the new government develop systems of delegation and consultation. They will have to do so. The question is how quickly and how effectively they do that. I think we should watch for the next cabinet reshuffle. A few months in, maybe 6 months in, there will likely be a cabinet reshuffle where the poorly performing ministers are maybe rotated out. There may be some shuffling around. And I think that'll be worth watching. Who gets to stay and who doesn't? Because the test at the beginning was loyalty. But if delegation and consultation is to be the new way forward, then it isn't loyalty that should be the test of who stays. It should be effectiveness and competence. So will those ministers who found their feet more quickly, taken on the responsibilities of their ministries, gone ahead and done things and made changes without necessarily getting every minor decision approved, will they be rewarded or not? I think that's a key. That will be a key question. The peace process, which Harn will say a lot more about, I think how that goes over the next few months will be key to look at. Does it continue in this kind of government-led, slightly unilateral push, or is there an effort to bring everyone on board and, if necessary, change direction on the basis of consultation? And then the last one, and one of the most important, will be relations with the military. Is the current prickliness of the military just sort of the shock of being in a minority in the parliament and having decisions taken that they have little control over? Or will this solidify into a deeper source of grievance? And will it start to affect the government-military relationship across the board? Because if a contentious relationship develops, it will be very hard for the new government to make much progress on Rakhine State, on intercommunal relations, on the peace process. All of these things require that the military is on board. Now, so far, the military is prickly. They're issuing press releases, which is very unlike them, complaining about things, but they're still being cooperative on the peace process, on many other issues. So we don't see yet a sign that they are entering a more confrontational stance more broadly. But I think that will be something very much to watch. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Richard. That's very helpful for us to understand, to have the broad picture of things to watch in Myanmar, despite some positive development recently. The new civilian government, the release of political prisoners, but there are so many issues that still challenging the future of Myanmar. The peace process, the new government, whether their lack of experience will result in the contention, the confrontation with the militaries, and also whether they be able to satisfy the expectation, the high expectation in various sectors of in the societies. And Richard even give us some signal to watch for the near futures. The reshuffle of the cabinet, whether it will bring, it still stick to the loyalty to the Aung San Suu Kyi and NLD, or it will lean toward selection of the competencies. But the problem is there, I wonder, is there enough pool of human resources for the NLD to bring it into the new cabinet if the reshuffle happens soon, right? It doesn't mean that Myanmar doesn't have enough competent people in the country, but sometimes the competent people may not, because of some problems, that they may not be selected. And the influence and the balance between the influence of Aung San Suu Kyi and the power of the military. This is also a contentious issue that challenging Myanmar. So thank you, Richard. So the next speaker, Harn Yawngwhe, will continue on the, I think he can update us on the things stand between the peace process, focusing on the peace process that Richard has mentioned before. This is one of the very biggest challenges for the new government to address. Is also including so many groups and also the military as well. So Han will give us about the prospect and challenges regarding the pre-process, including Aung San Suu Kyi proposal for Panglong 2.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate, especially I feel very happy because I used to study here for my undergraduate. Thank you. So I will, before I talk about the peace the prospects for the peace process, I'd like to give you a little bit of background so you can understand the problems. As you know, in the last 5 years, the government embarked on three very ambitious programs. One is the political reform, democratization. The other one is the economic reform, and the third one is reconciliation with the ethnic people. All three are very big programs and very challenging, and they are all interrelated. So in order to understand maybe a little bit much more about what Richard has been talking, I'd like to expand on the peace process. It started at the end of 2011, and when it started, the government made the conditions that the government gave to the armed groups was that give up your arms, form a political party, compete in the elections, and when you win seats in the parliament, come and talk to us about changing the constitution. The armed groups managed to get together in 2012, and they rejected that. And they were able to get the government to accept that rather than negotiating individually with each group, because the government managed to sign 14 separate ceasefires, the group said we want to negotiate collectively, and we don't want just a ceasefire, we want a political dialogue to change the country into a federal system of government. The government finally agreed to it in 2013, and it should have been plain sailing, but we ran into problems not from the government but within the ethnic groups itself. There were, I would say, three main problems. One was the military alliance called UNFC, which is more or less led by the Kachin. And they wanted to be the body who made all the decisions for the collective negotiation. The other two that objected was the Karen National Union and the RCSS, Restoration Council of Shan State. The objections were different for different reasons. The KNU felt that if the UNFC was going to make a decision, it should consult with the member organizations, which included the KNU. But the executive of the UNFC tended to make decisions without consulting member organizations. So the KNU said it was not acceptable, and they finally left the alliance. And the RCSS, the Shan group, refused to join the UNFC because they felt that the UNFC was based on membership. And they felt that if the armed groups are fighting for federalism, then the membership should be state-based, so that you start a federal kind of a system already within the alliance. So you had these three major groups that didn't agree. And so that has always been the problem and has persisted until now. But the RCSS and the KNU managed to work together, and they spearheaded what you saw in 2015, the signing of the nationwide ceasefire. So they brought along other groups, and 8 of the 21 groups signed a nationwide ceasefire. Now it looks like 8 out of 21 is not very good, but the 8 that signed are actually the groups that are more on the Thai border, and the ones that didn't sign are more on the Chinese border. And although it looks like only 8 signed, 4 of the biggest ones that did not sign have had bilateral ceasefires with the government since the 1990s. So in that sense, the military is not too worried because, 8 signed the nationwide ceasefire. The others that did not sign, the big armies are not fighting the military right now, so it's fine. And that leaves 6 other groups. Of the 6 groups, 3 have, as far as the army is concerned, have no army, so they don't need to sign. They can join the political dialogue. And that leaves 3 groups that are still fighting. So in terms of the army's perspective, they're not worried about 3 groups fighting, because in a way, for them, it's better that there are some groups fighting, because the role of the military is maintained, security-wise. If everybody had signed, then the role of the military is no longer needed. So I think they quite like the idea that everybody's not signing, and that there are some groups actually still continuing to fight, and they are still continuing to fight even when there is a new government. So for the military, it is better for their legitimacy when they are fighting the armed groups, because they are now defending an elected government. So that's the way things are working out. Next, what happened next is this year, in April, Aung San Suu Kyi, I jumped. So last year, there was a nationwide ceasefire signed by 8 groups, and the process for political dialogue was started, meaning that there is now a joint implementation coordination meeting that is supposed to be the highest body to implement the nationwide ceasefire. And under the joint coordinating meeting, there is something called the Joint Monitoring Committee and the Union Peace Dialogue Joint Committee. So you can see, initially when the government started talking in 2011, it was one-sided. The government was proposing everything, deciding everything. But with the NCA, it moved away from a one-sided process to a joint process where both the government, military, and the armed groups jointly decide on things. So there's this joint coordinating meeting. Then there's this joint monitoring committee, which works on monitoring the ceasefires. And then you have another one called the Union Peace Dialogue Joint Committee, which is supposed to oversee the political dialogue. And the agreement from the nationwide ceasefire is that the political dialogue will take place in several conferences outside Parliament, where the armed groups will be represented equally with the government and the military, Burmese military, and that whatever comes out of that dialogue will be used to change the constitution. And the objective of the dialogue is to form a federal union. So this is a process outside the Parliament, which will then lead to either the Parliament or a new constituent body drafting a new constitution. So it is what we call an extra-parliamentary process. But it is a joint process. Now, what has caused concern is that in April, end of April, Aung San Suu Kyi met with the Joint Monitoring Committee. The question that was raised was that why did she meet with the Joint Committee for Military Affairs and not with the JICM, which is the highest body to implement both the ceasefire and the dialogue? Even if she did not want to meet the JICM, why did she not meet with the Union Peace Dialogue Joint Committee? Is there a reason, or is it because she didn't know that these other bodies existed? So that's the question. And once again, what people are worried about is that when she announced the 21st Century Panglong Conference, it was not clear that whether this is a totally new thing, separate from the peace process, or is it something to replace the Union Peace Conference that had already taken place in January. So there is no clarity on that. And right away, the ethnic armed groups are worried because, first of all, during the elections, many of the ethnic political parties lost. So they don't have a voice in Parliament. And the only voice they have left is in the Union Peace Conference, which is the political dialogue that was set up by the nationwide ceasefire agreement. Now, if she is not going to go along with that conference and start something new, who is going to be in this Panglong conference? They don't have a voice, a political voice in the Parliament. They will no longer have a voice in the dialogue, and who will represent the ethnic people in the Panglong conference? So those are the questions. Nobody has the answer because it has not been clarified yet. But they were concerned that she, not only did she meet with the Joint Military Monitoring Committee, which is a military issues-based committee, she met again with the military representatives in the JMC to talk about the 21st century Panglong. So from their viewpoint, this is going back to the one-sided government initiative, not a joint initiative. They had Aung San Suu Kyi and the military and the government representatives met on the 9th of May, and they're meeting on the 16th of May again to discuss further how the Panglong Conference will shape up, how to set up a new body to replace the Myanmar Peace Center, which was disbanded in March. And again, it seems that the ethnic groups are not part of the consultation. So they are hoping they will be invited to the meeting on the 16th, but that is not certain. So in terms of the peace architecture, up to what it looks like now is that we may be moving from a joint structure, which was set up previously, to a one-sided structure, and that is of concern. And the other thing that is of concern is that within the armed groups that have not signed, as I mentioned, the UNFC originally was very much led by the Kachins, but now it seems that amongst the non-signatories, the leadership role seems to be moving to the WA. The WA are trying to become the leaders of the non-signatories. And that is also of concern because what the WA have now is something more than federalism. And so the question is, what is the solution that the WA will be pushing for? Because the WA have for more than 20 years had a pretty autonomous region where the government, health service, education service, any service, administration cannot penetrate. The Tamador, the military, also cannot go to the WA area. It's a very autonomous region. So what is the plan for the future if the WA becomes the leader of the non-signatories? So those are some of the concerns. And even more of concern for the armed groups, for the ethnic parties, is that it seems that Aung San Suu Kyi is trying to build an alliance with the military. She needs that for governing. But if she goes too far, this is a Burma government banding up with the Burma military, and where does that leave the ethnic people? So we're back to the previous concerns that led to the fighting in the first place. So these are some of the concerns that are pretty serious, but we don't know yet, as Richard said, where it will lead, because it is still early. But I thought, to understand the concerns, that's where if she begins to consult with the armed groups, then that might help. But the way it looks now, if it continues this way, we will definitely have problems in the peace process. Thank you.
Thank you, Han. Well, as Han said, it's still too early to anticipate what's going to happen with the peace process. But there are several key challenges regarding the peace process, as not just conflict between the military and the ethnic groups, the uncertainty about the so-called Panglong II initiated by Aung San Suu Kyi that caused worry to the ethnic group rather than bringing some expectation or hope, and also the conflict among the ethnic groups themselves, right? That between those who sign the ceasefire and those who haven't signed, and even among those who have signed and among those who haven't signed, right? This is just the beginning. I mean, we are talking about how to start the dialogue, how to start peace process, not even going to the content of the peace plan itself, which will be more difficult because we are talking about so many ethnic groups which have so many different aspirations and expectations, right? So it's a huge challenge for Myanmar.